This video was made in partnership with Geology. To get 100% off one of their starter packs and only pay shipping, use my link down below in the description. Out in the darkness between the stars. That's where the gods are. But as any guardian knows, what defines a god is a malleable thing. Gods do not have to be correct. Gods do not have to be absolutes. And sometimes gods can even be killed. The Hive, the Winnower, the Gardener, the Worms, the Witness, the Guardians themselves. Many gods that we face and many gods we have killed stand before us as tangible powers that reshape our reality. But what if the world itself was a god? What if it was something beyond our ability to perceive? What if it challenged the beliefs that we hold in our deepest core? The idea that we are in fact controlling our own destinies and making our own fate. Such things might seem impossible to us. The same guardians who defeated the festering darkness nestled in the Black Garden, who shattered the Taken King and his dynasty, who sundered the Witness from its monolith and liberated the Traveler. And yet it is not only possible, but it is so. For they have always been watching. They always are watching, and they shall always watch. Those enigmatic beings that have reached out to us and summoned us to the edge of the system to receive their judgment and hear their message. Entities tied into the gravity of planets, forged in the shadow of matter. The oldest gods in our system. You know of whom I speak. The Nine. Greetings, Guardians, my name is Byfear. Strap yourselves in. This video is a relatively long one, but rightly so. Today we're going to be diving into the lore of the Nine in as detailed a fashion as I can. The Nine have been a mystery in Destiny since its inception. In the earliest days of Destiny, they were unknown, and it was impossible for us to understand what they could even be. Now, 10 years later, with the release of Edge of Fate, and with the lore that's been accumulated over the last decade, I can finally give you a concrete explanation of who the Nine are at large. Normally, I'd be able to go over a distinct timeline of events and that might suffice. But dissecting the Nine as a topic is a tough one. So, we're going to break this down chapter by chapter, and I wanted to first start with some important topics. Namely, who and what are the Nine? What do they want? Who are their agents and emissaries? What do we know about each member of the Nine? And what is their story? And when have they made an impact on our timeline? These are all questions we're going to cover across many of our chapters today. As I write and record this, it's already looking like it will be an absolutely massive video and a huge undertaking. So if you want more massive breakdowns like this, please go and show your appreciation by leaving a like and subscribing. We're also partnering with a sponsor this time, so please support the channel, and on a big video like this, take a second of your time. Just listen. I'd really appreciate it. Today we partnered up with Geology to bring you this lore video. In this video I'm going to be talking about complicated fourth dimensional beings that mess with time and can throw trains at you if you look at them funny. That's all pretty complicated stuff, and yet it's about half as complicated as the average skincare routine. I imagine that for most of us guys, the problem with skincare isn't that we don't want to do it, it's that we don't know how. We've never been told what the difference is between an exfoliant and a cleanser. Geology solves that problem by demystifying the web of nonsense that skincare is, and they can do so in about a fraction of the time that it would take you to watch this video. I'll be giving you cursed knowledge about star gods from beyond our reality in the next 45 plus minutes, but you can take only 2 minutes to take a geology quiz and make a personalized skincare routine that's right for you, and that comes with a distinct lack of psychic damage, I might add. With easy instructions and a numbered step-by-step process with every routine, they cut out all of the faff and guesswork when it comes to your skincare routine. They also cut all the weird ingredients out, no Kepler junk in your routine, no random matter spark, no random Kepler green goop. Just dermatologist tested and approved ingredients. So jump in now and get 100% off your personalized skincare trial set and a free gift of choice. All you have to do is pay shipping and you'll receive $50 worth of skincare products and a free gift of your choice in every order, plus 50% off add-ons like their shampoo and shower gel. Thanks again to Geology, and back to the lore. Alright, you've been patiently waiting long enough. Thank you very much to Martin for editing this video with me. Thank you so much to you for watching it. And without any further ado, let's begin. The Nine are in some of Destiny's earliest stories, including Destiny 1's Old Grimoire, where they are first prominently mentioned in the entry Ghost Fragment Legends 2. It sets a precedent for the lore on the Nine going forward. That precedent is sadly that they are an enigma. The difficulty in comprehending them was partly thanks to the many ways in which they were first described by the lore. According to the Grimoire, the Nine are survivors of the collapse who made a compact with an alien force to survive, deep orbit war mines who weathered the collapse in hardened stealth platforms, ancient Leviathan intelligences from the seas of Europa or the hydrocarbon pits of Titan, a mysterious transmission from the direction of the Corona Borealis supercluster, the firstborn awoken whose minds race down the field lines of the Jupiter Io flux tube, ghosts who pierced the deep black without a ship and meditated on the hissing silence of the heliopause. Aspects of the darkness broken by the Traveler's rebuke, working to destroy us from within. A viral language of pure meaning. And finally, the shadows left by the annihilation of a transcendent shape, burned into the weft of what is. Needless to say, not all of these ideas can be completely coherent or consistent all at once, without some rather strange circumstances taking place, or some rather specific events. Some of the lore here is old and outdated to the point where it is right to assume that these are all what the title calls them, legends. In other words, ideas of what something might be based on superstition, storytelling, and observation, but not necessarily on a complete understanding of the facts. After all, back in the early days, even the idea of what darkness was understood very poorly in the city. So if this was a collection of rumors, it makes sense that some of it is poorly understood. And then one has to consider that we now know some of this is subject to a change in our understanding of the lore within the universe. This passage was likely written in a time where it was still assumed by the people of the Lost City that there were multiple war mines instead of just one. In universe, that understanding has changed and been very much updated, where the multiple war mines now are understood to instead likely be sub-mines of Rasputin. It also states that the Nine are both those war mines and are also aspects of the darkness broken by the Traveler's rebuke. We now know that the Traveler's rebuke was against the Witness, and that the Witness was not working actively with the Nine. Therefore, it seems safe to understand this oldest lore on the Nine as more of a demonstration of how complicated they are to conceive. These descriptions are often obscure and contradictory. Perhaps for the longest time they have been deliberately obscured from us. both within the universe by the Nine themselves, and in real life by developers who didn't necessarily want to reveal all the secrets of Destiny's universe just yet. The reality of what they are was left mostly intangible. In-universe, I'd therefore say that it is best to understand that our early ideas on what the Nine were are probably just based on guesswork from the denizens of Sol, who are all trying desperately to comprehend the Nine from the fringes, and inevitably, they're getting things wrong as they do. Such is the danger of speculation. This does also herald the start of a trend where, over the many years, the narrative team has laid out a different series of red herrings every once in a while throughout the lore in order to indicate what the Nine might be. Figuring out which of them is valid is tricky, because this is an expanding topic in the lore, and we can't be sure what is or isn't relevant. For example, the Mara Senna tells us about how the Awoken first began to wake themselves when they found themselves in the new homeland of the Distributory, deep within a singularity. However, there were 9 amongst their number who were unaccounted for. Such an obvious reference would seem as though it would be an indication as to who the 9 were, implying that perhaps they were members of the Awoken. However, this appears to be a red herring when you take a look at what we know now. On the other hand, the Antaeus Ward's exotic states that the celestial bodies of the solar system are alive in a certain sense and even have some form of soul that is referred to as a Gaia form, or, depending on which planet you visit, a form that is named appropriately for that planet. Antaeus Ward's also states that there are 9 great Gaia forms within our system, and so you have these two ideas, compelling as they may be, opposing each other. As it turns out, one of them is correct, and the other one might not be. The 9 missing Awoken seem to be a red herring, but they might be of relevance later. As the topic of the 9 evolves, it's something to keep in mind. There are many ties that bind the 9 to the whole of the system. However, thanks to recent lore and years' worth of slowly unraveling their mysteries, we now know definitively what the 9 really are. Let's break it down with the most basic of facts. Firstly, the 9 are not a hive mind. They are 9 individual beings. They may be referred to as the 9, but they each act independently, even if they sometimes cooperate with each other for their own mutual benefit. Secondly, this is where things get complicated. We know that the 9 are fourth-dimensional beings. That's a term which is loaded with meaning, but it's also completely incomprehensible to anyone who's hearing it for the first time. So let's explain. The 9 literally exist within the 4th dimension, and therefore occupy a higher plane of reality than we do. This has several impacts on their existence. Their perception of time is complete. In other words, they experience the whole of the past, present, and future all at once. This is one of their powers that has given rise to a troubling question. Instead of inferring the shape of the future like the Vex do, the 9 know it because they can experience the future and the present all at once. If they know such a future, can it truly be said that we Guardians make our own fate? It's as much a philosophical question as it is a practical one. Their 4th-dimensional nature also means that we cannot physically locate them in our 3-dimensional world. Because of this, the 9 need to find alternate methods of communicating with us, and often they will work through intermediaries that exist in the 3rd dimension, known as their emissaries. Thirdly, the 9 are ancient, with the oldest records of their presence in Sol dating back millions of years to the time before Earth could even support life as we know it. Fourthly, the 9 are entities of dark matter that exist as they do thanks to our presence. This is another really complicated aspect of the 9, but it is best explained by the analogy of the outline of shadows. Imagine for just a second that you're in a simple room with 4 walls, a floor, and a ceiling. No objects are inside this room. The walls, floor, and ceiling all look the same. If the room has no light, there is nothing but darkness. If the room is perfectly lit, there is only light, and no shadows are cast. But now imagine that there's a lamp in the middle of it, and that there's a statue in this room near one of the walls. The statue begins to cast a shadow thanks to the presence of the light, and it obscuring part of the wall.
To understand how we exist alongside the Nine, instead of looking at the whole room, just look at the one wall where the shadow is projected. Look at the shadows and light on the wall. We, in this analogy, are all the shape of the shadow. The Nine are the lit area where no shadows are cast. This is how dark matter and baryonic or normal tangible matter, sometimes referred to as bright matter in Destiny's lore, coexist within the universe. We can tell that both kinds of matter exist because of how they interact with gravity, but dark matter is invisible to us. In the times before sentient life existed in Sol, the Nine existed like the perfectly lit room. They were there ever since they formed their minds out of massive loops of dark matter dust, but it was only when sentient life with thoughts and experiences began to exist within Sol that their lives actually began to take shape properly and had any meaning at all. What happened to the Nine in the times before humanity is currently unknown, but this does raise an interesting question as to whether ancient life existed in the system that allowed the Nine to exist as well. Perhaps this is something that began thanks to the presence of the Vex in the early ancient days of Sol. So maybe there was something else that happened prior to these days. Regardless, returning to our analogy, the minds of the Nine and their own existence only really happens because of our existence. Without us, they don't really exist anymore. Because, much like the light in the room, they are given shape just as the shadow of the statue is given shape by the light being blocked. Without us, they cease to be. Think of them as the inverse space between where we are and where the rest of empty space is. They are both tiny and massive because they occupy all of that space. Dark matter entities can also be confusing because of the name. To be really clear about this from the very beginning, dark matter entities and dark matter should not be confused with the paracausal powers of darkness. Darkness is a neutral force often wielded by those of destructive intent, be it the Hive Gods, the Worm Gods, the Witness, or even our own Guardians. Despite the name, darkness and dark matter are not the same. Darkness is a power within the universe capable of breaking its laws and causality. Dark matter, though poorly understood, seems to operate within the laws of the universe. The Nine's continued obsession with acquiring paracausal power makes this distinction clear enough on its own, but it's important to state it, because it's very easy to understand how dark matter and darkness can be associated with each other, even though there is no association. And finally, each one of the Nine is associated with one of the major celestial bodies of our solar system: the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. 9 in total. Sorry, Pluto, you didn't make the cut. Each of the 9 is not referred to by their planetary names, though. Instead, the 9 refer to themselves according to their position in the solar system. Numbers represented by both Roman numerals and their own individual symbols. Sol, the sun at the heart of the system, claims the namesake of the whole group and is referred to as 9. From there on outwards, the group takes on a number for their name based on how close they are to the sun. For example, the member of the 9 whose gravity is bound to Mercury is called 1, as it is closest to the sun. Earth is 3. Saturn is 6, and so on. And so, 10 years later, we have these most basic understandings of who and what the 9 are. They are ancient, fourth-dimensional dark matter-based entities bound to the gravity of the sun and the planets of our solar system. They can perceive the entire timeline, be it past, present, or future. Their existence is in part thanks to gravity, forming the loops of dark matter dust that makes up their colossal minds, but also thanks to sentient life, silhouetting that dark matter and giving it definition, by which the 9 are able to have thoughts. In this way, the 9 are both massive and minuscule, given form both by us and our enemies. Subject to the entire solar system and the phenomena within it, the 9 are simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. That is the nature of a dark matter being. They are between everything, within everything, apart from everything. Wherever there is not baryonic matter, there may be dark matter instead. And in this way, the shape of the Nine is defined. We also now know two other crucial pieces of information. Firstly, the Nine's status as godlike beings is well earned, as they are indeed powerful. They are capable of sending things forward in time, though never back. They can see a broader spectrum of events than we can, and so are closer to omniscience than most other figures of supposed godlike power. Secondly, the Nine are not invincible. They are fallible and capable of gross miscalculation. And most critically of all, they can be killed. Perhaps when one thinks of a being from beyond our dimensions and knows that they are a god, they conjure the image of some non-Euclidean horror with inscrutable goals that stretch beyond the understanding and scale of a single person or even a single species, like some horror of Lovecraft, be it Cthulhu or Azathoth. Even in spite of their incredible power and their perception of humanity as their lessers, the Nine's overarching goal is still a relatively simple one to understand. Even if comprehending their forms or minds is nearly impossible, the Nine are driven by something so primal that all of humanity can understand it, something that they have desired since before the birth of humanity itself. The Nine want to live. More accurately, the Nine don't want to die. That might seem strange or even underwhelming at first, for surely a being of such immense power is not concerned with the continuation of life and takes it for granted. Instead, they might be concerned with their capacity to see their desires made manifest. The Nine are titanic in their power, striding the arc of time and the gravity-bound dust of the system all at once. But this is where you need to understand the nature of the Nine and how it makes the problem of surviving very different for beings such as themselves. Firstly, their perspective on time means that they have the ability to comprehend the future, and therefore any threats to their existence. Therefore, as they perceive what is to come, they are doubtless working to try and forestall a doom that they might well see ahead of us, perhaps knowing that they are too late, perhaps even experiencing it at this moment. Secondly, the Nine's existence in their current waking state is only possible because of the existence of life in Sol. Therefore, our fragility is their fragility. To return to our metaphor of the room with the lamp and the statue, if the statue is removed and no longer casts a shadow, there is once again only light, with nothing to define its beginning and end. The Nine will cease to be if we, the shadow in this metaphor, are removed. If we die, so do they. I think this has to be the single most important thing to understand about what the Nine want. Their existence is tied to ours. This is what they're trying to break. The pursuit of a solution to this problem has been the goal of the Nine since long before our time as a Guardian began, and since long before the arrival of the Traveler in Sol, though its arrival did give them a spark of hope. Or at least, some of them. Their objective of surviving and separating their dependence on us was clarified by them all witnessing an event that shook them to their formless cores, the death of a planetoid that collided with Earth billions of years ago, the planetoid of Thea. Thea was referred to by them as one of their kin, a former member of the Nine who perhaps was once 10. Maybe there were others beyond Thea if the chaos of the early system destroyed other such planetoids that could have had numbers attached to them, and fourth-dimensional beings as well. But it was Thea and the inevitable gravity that brought it into collision with 3, the member of the Nine formed around the planet we would one day know as home, Earth. It was that changed everything. The Nine still remember its scream lasting 1,000 years. Perhaps it would be fair to say that it haunts them. It is most certainly what stirred them to action. Ever since the Nine have feared death, ever since they have been working to prevent such a fate from befalling them all, even the many moons and gravity-bound objects of the system, those that the Nine refer to as their components, supposedly fear such a fate. Though it is worth noting we cannot openly confirm that the asteroids and moons of the entire system are also alive in the same manner. Perhaps they live, just not quite in the same way that the Nine do. Regardless, the fear was overwhelming, and from that moment of fear, a division within the Nine was born. They were sundered because of their disagreement about how to solve the problem of their own mortality. From this sundering, there arose two groups. A majority of 5 made up of the inner orbiting planets and the Sun, and a minority of 4 made up of the outer gas giants. The inner orbits sought immortality through transformation and perhaps even a true apotheosis. They believed that with the arrival of the Traveler, the Ahamkara, or maybe other paracausal powers that graced the system, they might be able to find a solution to break their dependence on us. If they could defy the laws of the universe and cause without causation, they would no longer be subject to the demise that the rules of the universe demanded from them. These members of the inner orbits are the ones who initially sent Zur and Orin to act as their emissaries. They have for the most part been attempting to aid the Guardians and have been trying to keep the light safe. At least, safe enough that they might one day salvage it or use it or steal it, in order for it to be their salvation. However, at least one amongst their number was also responsible for terrible calamity. They were responsible for allowing the Red Legion to invade the city. The attack that initiated the Red War was aided for the purpose of potentially discovering how the Red Legion intended to steal the light for themselves, a method by which the Nine might be able to follow in their footsteps. This shows not only the recklessness of the Nine, but also the way in which they do not necessarily see the consequences of their decisions as important. In aiding the Red Legion's attack, they put thousands of Guardians and Ghosts to the sword, not to mention hundreds of thousands of potentially lost civilians. But furthermore than this, the whole system could have been destroyed, thanks to the Red Legion's star-destroying superweapon, the Almighty. It is also likely that these outer members of the Nine sought transformation through other paracausal means, namely the Ahamkara. Near the end of the Dark Age and near the dawn of the City Age proper, the Nine seemingly sought out a deal with the Ahamkara, and as a result they descended upon Venus in great numbers, much to the distress and confusion of the Vanguard. It appeared that somehow the Ahamkara were changing Venus. Skolas the Rabid, the former Mad Kel of the House of Wolves, described it in this way. I saw the shape of the Nine on Venus, a place that was once precious to them, where wishes could transfigure their flesh. I saw that they are bound to this star and to these worlds. This is a speculative point, but presumably this transfiguration of the world of Venus was being conducted via the use of the Ahamkara's wish magic. This would imply that the Ahamkara gathered on Venus in great numbers because they were able to somehow tap into the cosmic will of the inner orbits of the Nine, and had used that power of desire in order to manifest a transformation, granting the wish of the Nine. Of course, no bargain with an Ahamkara comes without the threat of the twisting of the wish and the consequences of desire. It is still not clear if the Ahamkara were able to complete the Nine's wish in some manner. We have to presume that it failed, but we don't know if there were lasting consequences for them simply beginning their attempt. After all, this was the event that sparked the Great Hunt. The Nine never managed to see this transformation take place. Humanity hunted the dragons to extinction. And, as a result, the light was their only option from then on outward. And if the wish was twisted in some manner, the consequences of such a twisting are still unknown. Whilst the inner orbits attempted to use paracausality in order to transcend the rules that bound them, the outer orbits sought a different solution. They sought to escape. Their desires were not to see the guardians of life in their system protected. The outer orbits were indifferent to our suffering. Whilst the inner orbits sought transformation, the outer orbits' plans instead revolved around efforts to break free from the shackles of such dependence on our lives by escaping into even higher realities. One such means of accomplishing this was by the accumulation of a vast amount of dark matter dust. So much, in fact, that it might form a black hole, a singularity into which they planned to escape. This plan never came to fruition, but the outer orbits can still keep trying. And as was realized by Lavinia, the Cryptarchy rebel who first perceived of this plan, there is much more dark matter in this universe than bright. Within the bounds of the higher realities into which they might escape, the outer orbits are looking to create new worlds of dark matter, new worlds that will be theirs to command. Thus, they will end their dependence on the fragile system in which they are currently trapped. Beyond their main aims and the division between the inner and outer orbits, it also appears that there might be further schemes that each of the 9 still wishes to accomplish for themselves. Each member of the 9 is bound to its peers, but not in such a manner that their movements are completely restricted. Even within the groups of the inner and outer orbits, there is still further division and conflict. For example, within the outer orbits, 7 and 8, represented by Uranus and Neptune, see our presence as the weapon chosen by the 9 as useful and something that they need. Meanwhile, 5 and 6, represented by Jupiter and Saturn, do not. Within the inner orbits, one amongst their number was responsible for destroying the early warning satellites that defended the city from the Red Legion, and thus aided them. However, the other members of the 9, including the inner orbits, did not agree with this plan, and supposedly this member of the 9 was punished for its transgression. And yet, there are deeper plans and ambitions that still may not have been truly realized at all. 6 speaks of a dark will that has granted it a path to an ascendant orbit, a will that gave rise to itself, one with a dark, grasping intellect. 4 has made a point of stating that it shall nurture the ties that bind itself to us, just as 3 did, regardless of whatever the other rules put down by the 9 might be. 1 has given us glimpses of a pathway that we must walk within the corridors of time, a pathway that we have walked before, a pathway that we must walk again. And 8 focuses keenly on the possibilities of the Veil and the promise of how it might alter reality to assure freedom for those within its bounds. The only truth is that above us in the 4th dimension, these godlike beings are scheming, and to them we are but pawns on the chessboard, waiting to be moved, taken, and spent. It is perhaps most important to understand that this is the way the 9 see us within their games. We are merely tools. But more distressing still is the reaction of those extra-dimensional beings when they encounter opposition to their plans. As the Drifter once said, if the 9 need water, they will flood a river, and in the process, kill everyone downstream. Whilst I'm sure there were many defining examples of this mentality, I think the Red War may well have been one that is the greatest demonstration of this fact. New findings within the lore make it clear that this defining conflict that brought the tower and its guardians low was allowed to happen and aided by one member of the 9, but not just for the purpose of aiding them in their search for the secret of how to steal the light for themselves, but also for a much pettier reason, so that they might kill a single ghost, which stood in opposition to their plans. They allowed the Red War to happen, and aided in its initiation to kill one ghost. In the process of doing so, thousands of people died. To accomplish what they want, the sacrifice of any piece on the board is something the 9 will consider. They do not think of the consequences to those pieces, only what they will be left with. But sometimes, this also means that they need to use tools other than violence to get their way, and when words are more useful than weapons, the Nine need a translator, a host, a voice, an ambassador, an emissary.
The Nine are separated from our world and dimension, and whilst the outer orbits do not often care for our struggles, the meddling hands of the inner orbits look to us for a solution. They wish to keep us intact, and so, to that end, they have made efforts to ensure our survival, as well as their own ability to communicate with us. This is where their emissaries have become a vital part of their plans. The emissaries are individuals chosen by the Nine to be their voice, as well as to bring their word and messages to the relevant people of Sol. Since the Nine reside within the fourth dimension, they require these three-dimensional beings as a means of communication. In moments where this occurs, the Nine envelop the consciousness and person of the emissary in question and speak through them. This momentary possession is often characterized by certain obvious changes. There is a different light behind the eyes of each emissary upon possession. They speak with voices which are distinctly not their own. Their faces often stop giving off the same degree of expression and emotion that most would normally display, even if they speak with a voice that presents emotively. Most telling of all, the possessed emissary tends to levitate in these moments, and is seemingly able to do so indefinitely. The inner orbits are particularly concerned with the creation and maintenance of their emissaries, but the outer orbits can still make use of them when required. The species from which an emissary is drawn does not seem to matter as much as the personality and characteristics and skill set of the individual emissary themselves. The best emissaries are those who have a capacity for communication and negotiation, skills that the second and current third emissaries both possess in some form or another. Across the history of Sol up until this point, there have only been 3 emissaries: Zur, Orin, and Lodi. The first was Zur, often not called an emissary but instead an agent of the Nine, and for good reason. He is the least communicative of the 3. Zur is a strange, hooded and cloaked humanoid figure of unknown origins and uncertain species. He is sometimes described as a Jovian, though to this date no others like him have yet been seen. It is possible that there are others like him who exist out near Jupiter and Saturn, but it is equally possible that he was a pure creation of the Nine. Maybe the truth is somewhere between the two. However, Zur does often talk about a colony of his, some group that was able to exist out in the Jovians thanks to interference from the Nine, which saved them. To further support this claim, Zur was once overheard within the times before the Red War saying, "Our colony failed. Our machines were not adequate to the task of preserving life. We were not adapted to local conditions." Whether this means Zur is part of a greater species, or whether Zur is some kind of compound being created from something familiar and the essence of the Nine, is still uncertain. There are many things we do not know, and many things we may still discover in time about Zur. However, if there are others like him out there in the system, we have not found them. Even with the lapsing of interference from the darkness and the overwhelming presence of hostile forces in the Jovians, we have still found no further evidence that his species exists, aside from his regular appearances. Zur's most defining feature is by far his most unknown one: his face. It is constantly draped in shadow, which is formless at best. All that can be made out within the unnaturally dark aura of his hood is his 2 yellow eyes and a strange array of energetic tentacles that constantly ripple out from where his face should be, like banners of cloth caught in a foul but steady stream. He speaks in a deep voice, but is able to communicate in English, or at least some language that the Guardians at large can understand in the vaguest of terms. Whilst the language he speaks is comprehensible word by word, Zur is often known to speak in metaphor. This means that interpreting any meaning from him is difficult, if not impossible. Since his arrival in the tower, he has been a source of not only questions but also treasures. In exchange for tokens of dubious value throughout the system, often referred to as strange coins and only accepted by Xur, Guardians have been able to trade with this Agent of the Nine, and in doing so have acquired items of staggering power, with unique properties often described as exotic. These wares range from powerful fabled weapons such as the Yalahorn and Hawkmoon to esoteric armor sets from legends of the past such as the helms of Fellwinter and Saint 14. Xur comes and goes on a predictable weekly basis, but no one actually sees him stepping in and out of the tower. It seems as though he also regularly rotates his stock as he is pulled to and fro from the Jovians. Xur's movements are not always as predictable as they are in current times. In years past, he could appear almost anywhere in the system. He most commonly appears in the tower, but in the days after the Red War, he could also be found on Io, Titan, Nessus, and in the European Dead Zone. Along with extracting strange wares from him, there are strange pieces of information that Guardians and others within the tower have been able to overhear from him. His mad ramblings are often worth listening to if you want a strange mystery to unravel, but may never finish. Guardians have heard him refer to the Traveler as having a dark mirror, and after the Red War, he has been heard saying that this dark mirror has cracked and that the pieces are scattered. They have heard him speak of the individual cells in his body and how they know their purpose even as they die, of how the ancestors of his body's cells were present on the world upon which he resides, and perhaps many others. They have heard him speak of how he came to the light to understand the light, of how he has heard the echoing of the Traveler's song before. They have heard him speak more of the colony that he might have come from, the colony that failed and was perhaps saved and given purpose from the Nine, a place where there are no birds, but there are things that fly, things like shadows. They have heard him say, "We came up from the dust and burrowed into flesh for warmth, and became something new." They have heard him inquire as to whether we are ready to fight planets. But little has come over time from these many mysteries. Xur was the Nine's first attempt at creating an emissary, and even by their own assessment, it was a flawed attempt. A servant of the Inner Orbit's creation who better serves the purpose of finding strange curios and powerful weapons for us to then make use of. His will is not his own, and the Nine required one who was able to carry out their will, but also one who could provide their own perspective. More importantly, they needed one who could still commune, and who had a perspective that was more coherent to the people of Sol. Enter the second emissary, the one who up until recently was so prominent that she was referred to only as the emissary. In truth, over her many lives, she has had many names. The one that we know her by now, in this fifth life that she has chosen to lead, is Orin. She began as a Golden Age human who took part in the colonial endeavors of the Exodus program back in the Golden Age. In this first life, she was known as Nasya Sarwar. She was not assigned as a translator, but she would help other staff who were within the same janitorial duties of the ship to communicate with each other, and in this sense, she was one who allowed communications to take place. Connections were fostered under her watch. She made it so that the crew would understand each other, and so that they would feel less alone. When the vessel she was aboard was caught by a Black Fleet pyramid vessel during the collapse, she and the rest of its crew were dragged into a singularity that formed. Within this singularity, the crew of the Exodus vessel known as the Exodus Green, or Yang Lue, were transformed by the coalescence of light and dark. So it was that they became the Awoken. Nasya Sarwar, much like everyone else, was transformed in body and spirit. She took on a new identity as she was reborn in this new place, and her name became Nasan-Ar. So she began her second life. As the Awoken built their new home within the singularity,
upon a world they called the Distributory, Nassan-R would find herself working many roles over many years. The most important, which she eventually settled on, was the role of a translator. The Awoken all spoke one language, and so Nassan's job was not necessarily to translate words. Instead, it was to translate intent, feeling, understanding. In this way, yet again, she assisted those around her in ensuring that they were understood and that they could connect. She would one day follow Mara Sov and the others that believed that their purpose lay beyond the Distributory. Together, they would all return to the solar system at large, and would see the Awoken riven twice. Once between those that left the Distributory and those that stayed. A second time between those that went to Earth and those that stayed at the reef. In response to the split which saw some of the Awoken leaving to assist the people of Earth, Nassan-R would eventually follow, with Mara's blessing, and became a sort of negotiator on Mara's behalf. Her job was to spread the word of the Queen of the Reef and to be her ambassador of sorts. Unfortunately for Nassan-R, within a short time of her arrival upon Earth, she was found as she was sleeping and killed by Lightbearers. Her possessions were stolen. This included a silver urn with the ashes of her mother from when she was still a human. This would have been from her life as Nasya Sarwar, and yet it would still haunt her as time went on, particularly as she had entered her third life and was approaching her fourth. The end of her second life did, however, pave the way for a ghost to begin her third. Nassan-R was risen as a light bearer. She channeled the powers of a Titan, and her name was Orin. She named the ghost that resurrected her Gol, and together they would make an odd pair. Orin was trying desperately to learn more about the people who looked like her, the other Awoken. As she searched, she would join the Titans of the Pilgrim Guard, the Firebreak Order, and eventually the Guardians who made their way to defend the Last City. There she met a man who she would fall in love with, another Awoken. His name was Namchi. He told her of the reef and eventually endeavored to smuggle her back into the bounds of this place so that she might learn more about it for herself. They were caught, and Namchi would be punished with services rendered to the reef as restitution. But Orin was an entirely different question. She had returned to the reef even though she never remembered her past life. She had been at Nassan-R, but now she was Orin. In the end, even as Mara Sov and Sieur Ido saw the same figure that they had once known, it was decided on philosophical grounds that Orin could not be held to the old oaths of her past life as Nassan. She was allowed to leave, on the condition that she would return to the reef only if Mara Sov requested her presence. This request would be made if Mara needed a boon from Orin, a single unnamed request or service of Mara's choosing at the time and place of her choice. Orin accepted. After Namchi served his sentence, the couple reunited, and for hundreds of years they explored the system together in rapturous happiness. That was until death came to the shores of both Orin and Mara Sov's lives. It started with the death of Sieur Ido, Mara Sov's lover, the first Queen's Wrath. When her body was returned to the Queen of the Reef, there was only one additional item that had been found on her person, one of the 9's strange coins. At this moment, Mara called for Orin. It was time for her boon to be redeemed. Mara had known of the 9 before this moment, and she knew of their titanic size, and that it made them sloppy, careless. She understood that Xur's death might not necessarily have been the intent of their choices. They would still have killed Sieur, but intent mattered. She had to be sure. Orin was charged by Mara to search for Sieur's killers, and to identify if they had committed manslaughter or murder, and perhaps, if Mara deemed it necessary, to repay the action in kind, should it have been the latter. In her search for the Nine, Orin would eventually find someone. Not Sieur Ido, but Zur, the first emissary and agent of the Nine. In her interrogation of Zur, she would hear him say, "Forgive them." Zur then produced the silver urn that had been stolen from Nassan-ar at her death, an urn that Orin didn't recognize and didn't realize was an urn at first. Both her and Gol mistook it for a weapon being drawn. In response to this, she quickly crushed Zur's spine with a strike from her mighty hammer and moved to disarm him. When she did finally use a knife to open the dented urn, a thin grey powder poured forth, the ashes of her long-dead mother. Zur's rasping voice chuckled in this moment and stated that dust returns. It ever returns. Orin looked up and he had vanished. It is likely that Zur was making reference to the idea that we are all made of cosmic dust in one fashion or another, be it the baryonic bright matter dust that we are formed from, or whether it is dark matter dust, the same kind that forms the Nine. In the end, dust returns to dust. From this moment onward, Orin's dreams became stranger and stranger. She even had waking dreams of immaterial strangers speaking to her in unfamiliar tongues. She began to disassociate, not from her inner self, but also from her outer being. She felt as though she was breaking down into smaller and smaller particulate, even as she held on to those she loved for reassurance. Synesthesia began to change her senses. She could taste 9 in the word purple, and thought 9 when seeing the color green. Even with the support of Namchi, she was becoming incredibly lonely, isolated. In this time, her search for Zur continued, a persistence that drew her away from her lover. It was Namchi's death that would then shake her even more. He died at the hands of the Aphelion, a strange astral predator found out in the reef, known for leaving nothing in their wake but death and radiation. The Aphelion would attack a reef space station known as the RSS Amestris, where Orin's lover was stationed. All hands went down with this station, including Namchi. Orin didn't discover the truth for months. It was at Bamberger that she read the final reports of Namchi's last words sent to her. It was also here that she ran into a light bearer called Wu Ming. In her grief, he would comfort her. They would grow close, and eventually they would form a companionship of sorts. Steadily she would come to rely on him. He would sit and listen with rapt fascination to her stories of the Nine, and slowly they showed their vulnerabilities to each other. He spoke of his constant fear of death and how he wished he had never been blessed with the light. She spoke of the way the Nine were changing things, and of her search for its agent. We would of course know Orin's new and temporary companion by other names in our own time: Dredgen Hope, Germain, the Drifter. When Orin discovered his duplicity, she was driven only further into loneliness. There was no one left that she could rely on. There was nothing she could do to fix the broken parts of her life. There was only one left who could possibly be there as a steadying anchor. A ghost. Gol. At this point, perhaps the Nine were moving and understood that they could isolate their new emissary even further. If her one companion might be simply removed, she would walk happily into the clutches of the Nine and become their new mouthpiece. And it was here that the Nine's drastic action led to yet more devastation. It was at this time that the Red Legion were making their push into Sol and toward the Last City. One of the Nine acted in this moment and set events in motion that would lead to the death of thousands. If Dominus Ghaul could arrive at the Last City and attack it while it was unprepared, he would be able to perhaps deploy the cage and smother the light of the Traveler. This would help to separate Orin and Ghaul, and would allow the Nine to study Ghaul's mechanisms, thus allowing the Nine a degree of insight into how they might steal the light for themselves.
And so, one of the 9 would reach out, crushing the early warning systems of the last city, strangling their satellite arrays in cold, dark matter. Thus the Traveler was caged, thus the ghosts lost their light, thus Gol was isolated and died. The emissary was alone at last. Orin left to find the 9, drawn out beyond the heliopause, a long walk into the darkness. When she emerged in the service of the 9, she shed her old life and became something else. She began her 4th life as the emissary of the 9. The cosmic entities expected to claim her will entirely, but Orin's strength of self allowed her to clutch her being close to herself. In moments of desperation, it would still emerge, allowing Orin critical moments to communicate hidden secrets gleaned from the 9 themselves. In her time as the emissary, she would learn much of their nature. She saw their fallibility and how they might be all-seeing, but they were not all-knowing, and they certainly were not always wise. She was given glimpses into the death of Thea, the moment in history that led to the 9's division and defined them. Eventually, her duties as the emissary would take her to stranger places still. She would serve the 9 as a judge of their trials and rites, devised so that they might select their fated weapon, a guardian capable of serving their desires, a guardian capable of great feats of strength. That weapon, of course, would be you. She would communicate the 9's will to the Drifter after he displayed an acumen for the wielding of dark powers. The 9 knew that in order for us to survive and serve, we would need to make use of such powers for ourselves going forward. From this moment, Orin appeared, and the Drifter was suddenly gifted the Hall, an engine of potential whose purpose would not be revealed for years to come. They instructed the Drifter to make use of Gambit, and for us to play the game, feeding strength to the Hall for purposes unknown. The emissary also reached out to us, and alongside the 9, we discovered key insights into the world thanks to their invitations. We saw their perceptions of Mara, the Drifter, and even of the Guardian themselves, and some unknown force that transcended the game we all played, guiding them upon the thread of fate. We also saw the warnings that they gifted to the Drifter, warnings of the impending doom of the Black Fleet, and of how it would soon return. And when it did finally reach our shores, when the pyramid vessels of the Witness did arrive to blot out the sky again, it was the Drifter who would seek them out instead. Eris would accompany him alongside us as we sought out the emissary of the 9 and the 9 themselves. We asked what the nature of the darkness was, and the 9 provided us with prophetic visions of the challenges that awaited us, and the role of the darkness and the light. From this we would glean our cleanest indication so far that the darkness was a neutral force of the universe that we would also need to embrace if we were to defeat the Witness and survive a second collapse. After years in their service, and after the defeat of the Witness, Orin would eventually discover the truth of the 9's actions. She would discover how one of them had killed her ghost. The emissary in this moment resolved to make her own fate once more, and she would do so, thanks to the strength of will beyond the comprehension of so many others that she happened to hold. It was also around this time that she discovered something of such dire importance that it would change the world. She would not remember it until the appointed moment. But as she decided that she would leave the 9's service, she perceived the last message of 3, that it would die, that the Drifter should bring the Hall to its remains, and that the weapon, the ambassador, and the commander needed to be present to hear it speak for one last time. As she struggled against the will of the 9, she eventually emerged anew into her 5th life as the emissary no longer. She returned to her old identity, Orin. She no longer had the light and its power. She only had her slowly dimming connection to the Nine and a sense that she still had a part to play within the events that were soon to unfold. From here, the Nine learned more from their errors. They knew that their first emissary, Xur, was nothing but a puppet, unable to articulate their will. They also knew that an emissary with too much will of their own, like Orin, was liable to follow their own path and abandon theirs. The first and second iterations were flawed, but for the third iteration of the Nine's emissary, they would be far more careful in their selection, and would reach far back in time to select an ideal candidate for the role. Back in the distant past of 20th century Earth, they found who they were looking for. The first impacts of the choices of the Nine would be felt by a man called Louis Yarrow. He had been working with a government department of the United States called the DEO, or Department of External Observations. His role was that of a linguist. In his career with the DEO, he'd already been dispatched on at least one strange excursion, namely to the Alps in Europe, where he and a DEO field team recorded the remnants of a crashed alien vessel. Louis Yarrow, whose field code name was Lodi, was meant to be the instrument of first contact with any of the survivors. He was a linguist who had not only focused on having languages at his disposal, but also on the linguistic structures that make up languages generally. Thus, he had a better chance of translating an unknown language from first principles. Sadly, as best we can tell, there were no extraterrestrial survivors of the so-called Diablo-Ray incident, and the DEO, including Lodi, were forced to return without having made first contact. His life was already a strange one, and then he began to experience the same kind of dreams that Orin had. He journaled his experiences and slowly began to think that he was going mad. The dreams came and went on an irregular basis. One day at the DEO offices in Chicago, Louis Yarrow would see a door to a specimen containment area swing wide open. Within, there was a telephone set, disconnected from landlines and power. And yet it was ringing nonetheless. Someone was on the line. Someone wanted him to pick up. In that moment, he knew that if he didn't pick up the phone and answer, he would regret it for the rest of his life. And so as he put the plastic handset to his ear, he was captured in the grip of the Nine and pulled forward in space and time. As he fell through the strange dreamscape, he saw the future that was soon to be our past. He saw the launching of mankind's spacecraft, the United States' efforts to reach the moon. He also saw the arrival of the Black Fleet over Chicago and its decimation during the collapse. He was immersed within the Nine's will and essence, and would eventually crash back to reality on the surface of Kepler a few weeks prior to our own arrival. The DEO could not possibly have prepared him for such events in full, but he knew that he had to be prepared for anything, and so once again he would take on his field name and referred to himself only as Lodi. He would follow their procedures as he attempted to make his way back to Earth. Luckily for Lodi, he first met another friendly offshoot of humanity on Kepler, the Ionians. Their dialect and language had become unrecognizable to us, but as a competent linguist, Lodi made great strides in understanding them in only a short degree of time. After the events that saw us discover what awaited us on Kepler, Lodi would begin to embrace his role as the new emissary of the Nine. In these moments it became clear why he had become the Nine's selection as the emissary. He knew the terrible burden of his future and his role as a servant of the Nine, but he also accepted it. Lodi was called to serve a higher purpose, and he embraced it. Where Xur had had no will of his own and followed blindly, and where Orin had had too much will and an agenda of her own, Lodi was a middle ground between the two. He had a will of his own, but it was his choice to serve as the emissary. He knew that the role would be like walking through fire,
and he decided to take it on regardless, because he was called to serve. Even though it might lead him to great turmoil and suffering, he insisted that it should be him, if only to prevent it from being someone else. And so it was that the third of the 9's emissaries was chosen and ascended to the position. In each of the emissaries there has been degrees of refinement. There has always been clear qualities that define the best of its position. The best emissaries are excellent communicators, have skilled negotiation tactics, and have the ability to articulate meaning and intent via their spoken words. An emissary is therefore not merely a mouthpiece of the 9, they are their ambassadors in the third dimension. But their emissaries are not merely puppets. In the process of their immersion into the fourth dimensional existence that the 9 have access to, they also gain a degree of insight into the 9 themselves. And through studying their communications to us, to their emissaries, and with each other, we can do much the same. If you are to know the 9, you should also know that when they speak, they can be picked apart from one another, identified and defined. This has become easier over the many years as we have been able to piece together fragments of their communications with various figures. Their recorded dialogues with Orin in particular have proven most revealing. When first observing the 9, one can determine that they communicate predominantly through their emissaries, but they can also immerse individuals within their power for brief periods of time. When we first explored Kepler, we experienced this briefly for ourselves. Given the right circumstances, we may yet experience it again. It is, however, in the recorded communications between the 9 that the best progress in understanding them has been made. We have made the greatest strides when we are able to pick individual members of the 9 apart from each other and understand who is saying what. I know a lot of people worked to try and discern which member of the 9 was which before the launch of the Edge of Fate. I know because I was one of them. In particular, I think a little praise, however, should be given to Hex Cody, who was the one to at very least first properly divine all of the members of the 9 by their speech within the lore, and then put it into a nice infographic. This was done partly thanks to identifying the way that the 9 are presented in text and subtitles. Each member of the 9 uses different grammatical structures and syntax when communicating with us. By studying these, we can determine which of the 9 is speaking to us, and then by understanding which of them is speaking, we can start to determine their motives and what they think of us. What follows is a record of each of the 9, how they can be spotted when they're communicating, and what we know of their personality and the worlds that they are associated with, or the star in the case of 9 itself. I'll also be sure to show a clip or two of them talking where possible. Predominantly this is from the Council of the 9, where Orin and Lodi were both possessed so that the Council might speak to us directly. Before we jump into this though, you should also know about symbols. The 9 are not just represented by different syntaxes and grammatical structures within the way they speak, they also have their own logos. Most of you might know the universal symbol of the 9, which is 3 circles divided into 9 sections in total across all 3. This also, circumstantially, is made up of 9 lines. Each of the members of the 9 also has their own individual symbols. These act as the details of a seal upon a signet, something which you can use to tell the words of each one of them apart, or to tell that they have passed through or that their influence is present. Each logo can be told apart by a few crucial details. For one, the number of straight lines within each symbol can be added together to discern which member of the 9 is talking. This is true of every member except for 9 itself, which has 2 full circles and 1 straight line within its symbol. Presumably, the circles can be said to represent additions of 4, each bringing the count to 9 in addition to the 1 straight line. Each symbol also has a larger semicircle at the outer edge of its major collection of lines. This semicircle either resides within the upper half of the image with its points facing down, like a dome covering the lines, or is flipped and presides within the lower half of the symbol,
and looks more like a ball with its two pointed ends of the lines pointing upwards. This is not a part of what identifies each member of the Nine individually, but instead defines whether they are a member of the inner or outer orbits. For example, 5 and 7, associated with Jupiter and Uranus, both have the lower position of the semicircle with its points facing upward. Meanwhile, 1 and 9 have the upward turned semicircle with its points facing down. Understanding this will help you identify which of the 9 belongs to which symbol, and it will also allow you to differentiate their actions. It also means that at a glance you will be able to understand which symbol belongs to which member of the 9 a little more easily, especially when some symbols can look similar, such as the symbols of 5, 6, and 7. To understand how each of them operates, we should start examining them as they refer to themselves, by name and number. Firstly, there is 1, a member of the inner orbits associated with the planet Mercury. Their speech within the lore is often the most comprehensible. They use a normal sentence structure and will make use of proper punctuation. Of particular note is the correct use of capitalization and full stops, aka periods. This matters given that most other members of the 9 can be distinguished by their omission of these normal rules of grammar.
Ridiculous! 6! We are at war! 1 casts our vote in the affirmative!
Associated with the gravitational pull of Mercury, 1 often presents itself in a matter-of-fact way with an aim to assist us. It in itself is also an enigma, as Mercury has been subject to much turmoil over the years. It was partly consumed by the Almighty when Gaul and the Red Legion began draining it for fuel. Even before this point, Mercury was infested with Vex and was home to their infinite forest. Things were only complicated further when the Witness pulled it into the deep not long after the arrival of the Black Fleet. 1 is therefore a member of the 9 who is present but who is attached to the gravity of a world that is both lost to the Vex's infinite forest and the Witness's abducting darkness. Regardless of this, 1 has been nothing but supportive in its interactions regarding us, and seems to appear as a practical but uncomplicated member of the 9. It is concerned with the problems that present themselves in the immediate future. Based on its rebuke of 6 and its dialogue within the lore, it appears to be practical and pushes against the interpersonal politics of the 9 when those interactions start to prevent the group as a whole from taking sensible action. It seems to present itself as 1 who cares only for facts, action, and reality. We do not know its motivations just yet, and it's entirely possible that it might see us as beneficial and that we might be able to have at least a transactional relationship with 1. But I imagine that there is pragmatism behind it. If it does see a reason to betray us, maybe it would. This is unproven as of yet. We are a useful tool within the 9's arsenal, being the chosen weapon, so maybe 1 is not as concerning as some of the others. Next, there is 2, another member of the inner orbits, this time associated with the planet of Venus. Their speech in the lore has no punctuation except for capital letters at the start of its sentences. Their sentence structures are the first amongst the 9 that veer off wildly into less than understandable formats. Its speech is often punctuated with hyphens, perhaps for emphasis or to separate ideas within a sentence, though the exact reasoning for their placement is unknown. It often speaks in a manner that seems to cut out any superfluous words from a sentence. When one of us might say, "It is a matter of taste for an individual," 2 might instead just say, "individual matter of taste."
Stupid to ignore threat, arm ourselves. We never move without intermediaries. I to all.
Associated with the gravitational pull of Venus, 2 seems dispassionate and uncaring, but perhaps this is simply its manner of speaking. It also is one of the members of the 9 who has been documented the least amongst their number, so we have little evidence to the contrary of this point. It has pointed out the logical flaws of other opposing members of the 9, pointing out that their actions are stupid. It isn't something that's been done with an active intent of causing harm by the looks of things, though. If 1 is practical, 2 is dispassionate and uncaring. It's almost bored by the events unfolding before it. Whilst these actions and these words are doubtless offensive, Venus seems to put very little thought behind them, although it is entirely possible that this is merely the sentence structure that's presented, and the lack of superfluous words making it seem like they are elsewhere. Venus itself has been home to a lot of strange events over the history of the system. It is the place where the Ahamkara supposedly tried to use their wish magic at the behest of the Nine, where the Nine's flesh was transfigured. It is the place where the Vex have altered time within the Vault of Glass. It is also one of the many worlds that the Traveler terraformed long ago. Two in particular, across many of their text and dialogue moments, seems almost distracted, and is perhaps concerned with other more complex matters elsewhere and elsewhen. Its motivations are likewise unknown, but its clear perspective of us as an intermediary should be a concern to some. To be blunt about it, whilst some other members of the Nine might dress up their opinions of us, I think 2 is going to be very transparent about the fact that they see us as nothing more than an implement for them to use. 3 is the member of the inner orbits associated with our homeworld of Earth. Their speech is very comprehensible in a similar manner to Mercury. Its sentences might often lack full stops or capital letters, but it often speaks in a clear syntax just as 1 does. This makes it come across in a much more casual manner, as one might message a friend when there is no requirement for proper procedure.
You stand here, that I would not die alone again.
3 is associated with the gravity of Earth and seems to have been deeply affected by the presence of humanity. In almost all the instances where it has spoken to us, it spoke in a tone that was caring. Before its second passing, as it delivered its final message through Lodi, its words made it explicitly clear that it saw itself as a parental figure to those that resided upon Earth, or originated from Earth. It referred to its murderer, Maya Sundaresh, as our sister, and it referred to all of us as the children of its Earth. Of all the 9, 3 was perhaps the one who cared the most about us. In its various interactions with other members of the 9, it often would make pleas to them based on emotion rather than fact. However, it is also the first of the 9 within our living memory to have perished, proving once again that these gods are indeed mortal. It was dragged from the 4th dimension into the 3rd dimension by Maya Sundaresh as punishment for its inability to trade the places of Earth from the Golden Age past with Earth from our post-collapse present. It set events in motion to deliver its message, and as it was briefly resurrected, it told us that our future contained a possible extinction, thanks to it itself having been killed. 3's death not only set off this cataclysmic series of unforeseen events, but it also unbalanced the Council of the 9, drawing them into stalemate. Where before the inner orbits held a 5-4 majority, now the sides of the 2 factions within the 9 are balanced in stalemate. Its corpse now lies at the heart of Kepler, near the Singularity. The House of Exiles were content to feed 3's remains into the Singularity, so that it might expand until it took the whole of Sol with it. In its final words, it told us that to survive, we had to bind the other members of the 9. The exact meaning of this act of binding is still not understood, even though it is bound to be critical to our continued survival, if 3's words are to be believed. 4 is the outermost member of the inner orbits associated with our closest celestial neighbor of Mars. Their speech uses proper punctuation and has an understandable syntax, but is notably different in one way. It's always presented as speaking in all capitalized letters. It is the first of several members of the 9 to do so. It is still one of the more comprehensible members of the 9 in spite of this, even if it presents as a being who is always projecting or shouting.
As you sustain us, you will sustain us. 4. Accept.
4's place in the system as the member of the Nine associated with the gravitational pull of Mars has put it at the center of some of the most important events in the system's history. It was the first member of the Nine that bore witness to the Traveler's actions, as it was the first to have its associated world terraformed into a livable state. Mars was briefly abducted by the Witness soon after the arrival of the Black Fleet. We still do not know if this has had any impact on 4. The all-caps nature of the text seems to imply more passion than wrath, as it is the only member of the Nine that has explicitly stated within its lore that it aligns with 3 and is actively looking to safeguard the ties that bind it and us together. Whilst we don't completely understand the motivation of any of the Nine, in the lore 4 seems to present itself as the most actively beneficial to us, and perhaps the one member of the Nine that we can trust the most. It seems like it would be happy to disregard the rules that the other members of the Nine put forward, and it also seems to view their squabbles as pointless just as 1 does. Most importantly of all though, it has told us directly that its movement to assist us is based on grief, perhaps based on the death of 3, as well as other planetary minds that have defined the system long ago. Next, we move on to the first of the outer orbits, starting with 5, bound to the gravity of Jupiter. 5's speech is perhaps the most plainly difficult to read, even before one comes across the issues of interpreting what text might mean, and whether there is a hidden meaning behind every phrase. They speak without grammar of any kind, and are always in all caps. Most frustratingly of all though, they speak with a space between every letter and not just between the start and end of each word. This can make identifying the start and end of individual words within each sentence much more difficult, and also presents rare moments where their speech can be misinterpreted, as a sentence may have multiple meanings. For example, when writing the sentence "if I remain" in Jupiter's syntax with all caps, you can also spell out "I fire main." This is just one little example of how Jupiter can be misinterpreted, and it makes translating and then interpreting the meaning of this particular member of the Nine even more challenging than most.
Speak what they have spoken.
5's ties to Jupiter make it the member of the Nine bound to the largest planet of the system. Only 9 itself, bound to the gravity of Sol, is greater by impact on the gravitational scale. Jupiter has seen its fair share of human life with the Golden Age colonies from Europa to Ganymede to Io. It has also seen its fair share of the Traveler, given that Io was in the process of being terraformed. It has also seen its fair share of hostile paracausal forces, especially thanks to what played out across the surface of Europa, the first place where we claimed the powers of darkness. 5's speech in all caps often feels appropriate, as it often speaks in an accusatory tone and presents either plain statements or aggressive sentiments. Its speech within the lore also seems to be imperious and entitled. It does not ask for our attention like 1 or 4 might. Instead, it demands it and expects us to hearken to its word and commands. It seems as though 5 sees itself as the heir to the system, given that Jupiter is the largest celestial body besides the Sun. It can be presumed that Jupiter will work with us only under conditions that suit it. It seems to be assured of its supremacy and is unflappable even when presented with problems. Perhaps it sees itself as the metaphorical first amongst equals within the outer orbits. After 5 comes 6, a member of the outer orbits bound to the gravity of Saturn. Much like 4 and 5, 6 communicates in all caps. Their speech is most similar to that of 4, but like 3, it chooses to use very limited degrees of punctuation. Thankfully, it doesn't have a difficult syntax like 5 or 2 does, and its sentences are often simpler to understand as a result.
Complete, abject, insulted refusal.
6's ties to Saturn have exposed it to some of the darkest events in the entire system's history. In particular, The position of the Dreadnought within its rings has led it to seeing both the start of the Taken War with the Battle of Saturn and the many subsequent conflicts aboard the Dreadnought that have taken place over the last 10 years. 6 has seen many monarchs and gods rise and fall within its lifespan. In a certain way, it seems to see itself as a god, though when communicating amongst its fellow members of the Nine, it seems more willing to play politics than most others. But there is something deeper than this. In the lore, it seems to somehow have connected with darker powers of the system, including the Dire Taken and the Dread. It appears to have learned from something that gives rise to itself, perhaps implying that it has been assured of its ascension by the force of will that now leads the new Dire Taken, the so-called Lord of Every Nothing. If there is more to remember about 6, it is only that it expects to escape from the binding ties that are represented by humanity and other sapient life in the system. Whilst both it and 5 are generally uncaring about our continued existence and will demand our attention and obedience, 6 is the harshest of the two. It presents itself as a scheming tyrant in abject opposition to us and our objectives, perhaps even in opposition to our existence itself. It expects us to respect its place as a divine agent. Should we fail to do so, it may act harshly. At the end of the lorebook associated with the different members of the Nine, epochs and orbits, it even decides to kill us as a show of strength and to remind us of our weakness. Luckily for us, Guardians are capable of resurrection, but this should remind us of the direct and open contempt that 6 is showing us. The next of the outer orbits is 7, the member of the Nine associated with the gravitational pull of Uranus. 7's patterns of speech are somewhat comparable to those of Venus. It speaks in all lowercase letters and without punctuation. It is only made stranger by the unusual structuring of its sentences, which all have plus signs between different parts of the sentence. These pluses seem to act as conceptual links between different words within each sentence itself. They don't cut off as much superfluous detail as 2 does. Instead, the plus signs feel almost like an overused comma placed more for breaks in speech than breaks in a run-on sentence.
Yea, unsheath the weapon. But reactionary choices. Empty-seated. Nay, to the emissary.
Much like 2, 7 is an enigma to us, and this is partly because, much like 2, there is very little written by it within the lore. However, it is also a mystery to us because we've never had a reason to visit Uranus or one of its moons. It has had less interaction with us than any of the other members of the Nine, according to how many times we've visited their planets. However, 7 and 8 together represent an interesting break within the unity of the outer orbits at large. Whilst 5 and 6 demand respect and make their plans with a degree of brash certainty, 7 and 8 recognize that there is at least a need for us, the fated weapon. We might still be a tool to them, this seems to have not changed whatsoever, but their position seems to be less assured than that of 5. As a result, they seem to be more willing to engage with us than any of the other outer orbits. It's very much a guess, but I imagine that to a certain extent, 7, whilst not necessarily always being on our side, is at least willing to attempt a frank dialogue with us. Whether this approach is honesty or not is unknown, but I'm initially inclined to at least listen. After all, it seems like it has attempted to push an idea upon us, namely, the idea that the inner orbits being polite to us is only a way of manipulating us for their own ends. Be it that 7 is a trickster amongst the members of the Nine, or be it the most honest of them all to the point of being brutal about its peers, they are amongst the more fascinating members of the group, purely because they seem to be a relatively blank slate. There is no end of stories that could come from this particular member of the Nine. The danger with such a blank slate is that one must not fill the gaps unnecessarily with assumptions. It is easy to project when a blank slate is presented. I've done a little bit of filling in the gaps here with my assessment of 7, so take everything I say with caution. Seven's desires in these matters are still unknown. For what it's worth, I do not believe that it would align itself with the other outer orbits, including the likes of 5 and 6, if it wasn't at least a little cutthroat in some regard. The final member of the outer orbits is 8, which is associated with the gravity of the planet Neptune, the furthest major planet from Sol. Once again, my apologies to Pluto. Yet again, similar to 2 and 7, 8 is a member of the 9 who can be identified by their weird sentence structures. It is almost identical to 7, except for one key difference. Its sentences aren't interrupted by plus signs, instead, they are interrupted by equals signs. This changes things relatively dramatically. Instead of building through a series of statements like 2 or 7 does, reaching a conclusion from an initial point, 8's statements always feel as though they are mirrored with each other. The equal signs implies that its statements are always built by comparisons and connections. It also means that often, but not always, 8 speaks in sentences that have only 2 assertions tied together by an equals sign. In some instances, this leads to multiple assertions that are tied together in a long series of connectivity. But often, it is merely making a simple observation, pointing out similarities, and therefore stating its own position.
Emissary appointment, declination. Weaponized flesh tool, affirmation.
8 is a member of the 9 worth watching purely because they have one of the cruxes of paracausal power residing on their doorstep. I am, of course, referring to the Veil. This paracausal dark equivalent of the Traveler is at bare minimum the radiating source of the energy of Strand, the unconscious power of connectivity, and the threads that bind the universe together. But more so than this, it might represent a power of darkness that is even more primal still. 8 has looked at the Veil with at least a little curiosity, and its future interactions with this source of paracausal power might lead to an alternative means for the outer orbits of the 9 to break their dependence on sentient life and escape somehow. 8 itself comes across as a condescending sort. In one of its earliest communications with us during the Rite of the 9, it called us spoiled children, directly asking why we were gifted the boons we received when the 9 would have done so much more with them. Its penchant for having 2 statements and an equal sign in its shorter sentences does also give the impression that it's always answering its own questions, or reinforcing statements as if presenting them as obvious or even factual, even though that might not actually be the case. Whilst 7's motivations seem a little more mysterious, 8 is transparently trying to use us as a tool for its own end. It's not to be trusted outside of any actions that can be taken which clearly are in the interests of both sides. That being said, I do not believe that 8 views us with the same active hostility that 6 does. 6 would plunge a sword into our hearts for disobedience. 8 feels more like it would see that disobedience, roll its eyes at us, and then insist that we follow its orders. And last, but certainly not least, we have 9 itself. The greatest member of the inner orbits, the first amongst the not-so-equals within the pantheon of the 9, the member of this group of godlike presences associated with our home star, Sol. 9 is certainly the strangest member of the 9 according to how their text is presented. Their sentences have large numbers of full stops, aka periods, within them, and their sentences almost always start with a full stop. It also tends to divide its sentences roughly down the middle with a vertical line, which can and often does appear in the middle of words. Sometimes these vertical lines even appear multiple times in a single sentence. Sometimes they only appear once. Other than that, 9 speaks in all lowercase letters.
This quitter is an outcast, but still connected and useful.
This beautiful boy is the emissary to be, paperwork permitting. And you, Guardian, you are the weapon we chose by right and trial.
9 presents itself as the leader of this celestial family. Its place as the member of the 9 tied to the largest source of gravity within the system makes it appear as more powerful than the others, and it often acts with such power. It's not clear how much 9's power extends over the rest of the group, but it seems to at least be able to wrest control of the emissaries of the 9 when all are assembled. When 9 does speak, it often comes across as capricious and sometimes even volatile. Sometimes when 9 speaks, it has a certain degree of sass to its words, and it speaks with a charm and easy demeanor. But when plans or figures within its plans push against its will, it is quick to anger and shows an entirely different side of itself. For every moment where Lodi is being called a beautiful boy by the 9, there is a moment where it is screaming at Orin to be silent and calling her a quitter. This capricious nature has even been presented towards us, where at first it quickly demanded that we kneel, and then followed up by steadily and reassuringly asking us to kneel. Perhaps this is the reason for the vertical dash down the middle of the sentences. This might represent how 9 is a being with two sides in stark contrast, in the same way that we can never see both sides of the sun at any one time. Then again, there are some sentences where 9's speech shows a vertical line placed a multitude of times through its structure. So, take that idea with a pinch of salt. It is the would-be ruler of the 9, and it often acts as such. It speaks on behalf of the whole group, and sometimes summarizes their decisions and discussions. It also has had some of the most contact with us directly, and is willing to communicate with figures like Lodi on a more regular basis. In fact, it seems to have a disturbing degree of fondness for Lodi in particular, and has on multiple occasions complimented his hadrons, whatever that means. 9's motives are as of yet unknown to us, beyond the greater desires of the inner orbits to find a means of ending their dependency through the use of discovering the secrets of paracausal power. But I get the sense that 9 is using us more than most. If there are manipulations being made by 2, 1, 7, or 5, they are all either well masked or indistinct, or mostly are being made without us needing to act beyond our bounds at current. 9 seems to break this mold, and seems content to step directly into the breach where possible in order to manipulate events as it desires. In this sense, perhaps its capricious nature is also a demonstration of its need to control any situation. This might make sense given that it is tied to the sun. Its gravity effectively commands the orbit of all other celestial bodies in the system. The sun's existence allows us to exist. Why shouldn't it have control? Without it, all else perishes in darkness. With that, you should all hopefully have a better understanding of each of the members of the 9, should you have any further interactions with them. There are, of course, some other oddities to the 9 that are not mentioned anywhere else. Thea's destruction represents the death of a hypothetical 10th member of their cohort, but 4 also holds silent vigil over another that could have been at the very beginning, a stillborn member of the 9, whose corpse was bound to the unformed mass of gravity held within the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. This member of the 9 is referred to as Zero. Its heartbeat unanswered now drifts eternally within the system, held between the gravity of Mars, Jupiter, and the Sun, eternally laid to rest amongst the remnants of Ceres and the mass of other giant asteroids like Pallas and Vesta. Whether Zero might one day come to life is thus far unknown to us. We shall have to wait and see. Understanding the 9 is a great boon to anyone who is looking to interact to them. Hopefully it's also helpful to have a more concrete idea of when and how they may have impacted the system across the vast swaths of our history. Being fourth-dimensional beings made of dark matter, their influence is vast, but what we can track of it is still vital. Finally, now that we understand the 9, their emissaries and their goals a lot better, I wanted to leave you with this.
A timeline. I've taken the time to find as many events or lore entries related to the Nine as I possibly could, and to piece them together into a coherent sequence of events. Inevitably, there will need to be an update to this chronology as more events are revealed and are discovered. After all, there are so many events in the past that could well have been related to the Nine and their agents. We can only guess how deep the connections go. For the moment, this is a summary of how the Nine and those relevant to their tale have been woven into our greater story. Don't worry, this will be a relatively quick affair compared to my 10-hour marathon, but I will take you all up to the end of Edge of Fate and cover any critical events and mysteries involving the Nine as I can. If I've missed something, by the way, please go ahead and let me know down in the comments. I imagine that I've not hit everything. I've tried to be as conclusive as I possibly can, though. Starting in the times long before humanity, in the prehistoric moments of Sol, the Nine and their minds first learned to form loops of dark matter dust, which allowed them to have thoughts and minds and for them to effectively be born. One thought began, another ended, and thus the Nine came to be, though they were not truly alive until other life arose within the worlds of Sol. Until then, they floated in a degree of indifference. Perhaps in the time long before humanity, there was ancient life elsewhere in the system, be it the Vex or something else. Regardless, we now know that the Nine were not always indifferent in this time. We know that they must have not been indifferent when Thea died. Thea's death is the next major event, where it collided with Earth, and where the Nine perceived the doom that lay within its fate. This doom would come for them all in time, the doom that comes with destruction. They sought a solution to this problem, and as is well documented, they would be divided. We now fast forward a great deal of time. By the turn of the 20th century, some key members of humanity would begin to get pulled into the Nine's plans. Most importantly of all were two figures from North America. In particular, Louis Yarrow and Dr. Nella Davis, both of the DEO. Louis Yarrow had been recruited to work as a linguistic specialist at the DEO. Dr. Nella Davis was recruited as well and would find herself working on Project Graviton, a weapons project that was making use of something called strange matter. During his time at the DEO, Louis Yarrow was given the codename Lodi. His most notable mission was probably when he was dispatched to the village of Les Diablerets in the Swiss Alps, along with a DEO field team to investigate a crashed vessel of some kind that appeared to be extraterrestrial in origin. The team discovered no survivors at the crash site. In 1963, JFK was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. When the killer's weapon was recovered, analysis by the DEO and the autopsy of the president confirmed that the weapon was capable of somehow manipulating gravity, as its ammunition pierced its target. This interaction was described as involving strange matter. The origin of the weapon used was not verified, but it's entirely possible that other forces were involved. Possibly the Nine, possibly something else. At a certain point in his time working for the DEO, Louis Yarrow began experiencing vivid dreams that disrupted his sleeping patterns. This is the first point of proof that the Nine were interfering with him. Shortly after this, Louis Yarrow stepped into a containment room in the DEO's offices in Chicago. He had been drawn in by the sound of a ringing phone. The phone was disconnected from landlines and power, and yet it rang anyway. When he picked up the handset to answer, he was abducted by the Nine and pulled forward in time and space. On the same day, Dr. Nella Davis would be returning from the DEO offices in a hurry and would be killed by the Nine, a member of whom slammed a train into her car, pulling it through time and space as well. She died and was left in a location where her body might one day be found and might one day be resurrected as a guardian. We now fast forward to the time of the Traveler's arrival in the 21st century and the dawn of the Golden Age. By this point in time, the Traveler had already begun to terraform the worlds of Sol, and many of them would feel the graceful touch of the Traveler's light, including Mars, Venus, Mercury, and many others. In this time, Chioma Essie, Maya Sundaresh, and the other researchers of the Ishtar Collective would have their notorious encounter with the Vex unit known as Specimen 12, which simulated them 227 times. After saving these copies, the Ishtar team decided to release them into the Vex network at the Citadel on Venus, a massive Vex structure. We meet some of these copies in the Desert Perpetual raid. Maya and Chioma parted ways for a time before reuniting and taking their places aboard an Exodus program vessel, the Exodus Indigo. At this time, another vessel of the program, the Exodus Green or Yang Lewei, was also leaving the system, and on the crew of that vessel, there were many famous figures that would one day turn into the Awoken, including Mara Sov, Aldrin Sov, Sieur Ido, and Orin the Emissary, who at the time being was known as Nasya Salwa. Not long after the collapse would occur, the Exodus Green would be dragged into the singularity that led to the Awoken's eventual new homeland, the Distributory, and it would also create the Awoken. The Exodus Indigo, on the other hand, would successfully evade the Black Fleet at large and would touch down on Neptune, leading to the founding of Neomuna. It was here that Maya Sundaresh and Chioma Essie discovered the Veil, which had been placed on Neptune by Savathun, the Witch Queen. In time, Maya would become obsessed with the Veil, even hearing whispers from it as time went on. She eventually immersed herself within the Vex network, and her physical body died. Chioma Essie would eventually follow her. After the collapse had ended, and the Traveler successfully repelled the Black Fleet, Mara Sov and her chosen Awoken left the Distributory and moved into the Reef. Nasan R, who in her previous life had been Nasya Salwa, returned with Mara. Not long after this moment, when many of the Awoken of the Reef decided to return to Earth to help the people there, Nasan R followed them, and, not shortly after that, she was killed. At some point later in the Dark Age, Nasan R was resurrected as Orin, the Titan who would one day become the Emissary. Her ghost, Gol, would be by her side from this point onward, until it was eventually killed in the middle of the Red War. Back in the Reef, Aldrin was sent to seek a unique source of power that would allow Mara an asymmetric advantage over the other forces within the system. He returned to her with Riven, the first known Ahamkara. And from there, the Awoken's relationship with the Ahamkara would begin. It would be a relationship that would grant the Awoken a great degree of power, and such a relationship would also eventually be something the Nine would look to form as well. With the powers of the Awoken and the Wish Dragons in concert, the Dreaming City was created, and both the dragons and the dreamers lived alongside one another in relative peace. At an undisclosed time during the Dark Age, there would also be many famous guardians that would rise for the first time. This would include Ikora Rey, who was risen by her ghost Ophiuchus in accordance with the Nine's plans. She was risen from the remains of Dr. Nella Davis, who the Nine had killed back in the 20th century. Near the close of the Dark Age, or perhaps the early City Age, the Ahamkara would be summoned to Venus and would begin to transform it. Skolas would describe his perspective on this event as seeing the wishes transfiguring their flesh, and seeing the Nine in the flesh of Venus. The Consensus and the Vanguard, in their lack of understanding and in their fear of the Ahamkara's power, would decide that the right course of action was to hunt the Ahamkara to extinction. Thus, the Great Hunt was enacted, and the dragons were killed, but for a few exceptions, such as Taranis and Riven. In this way, the Nine lost one of their means of accessing paracausal power, thus forcing them to focus on the Traveler, the Guardians, and the Light. At some undisclosed point in time during the Dark Age, Xur probably began appearing within what was the rudimentary bounds of the city as well, though the exact start date of his appearance within the city has never been recorded. It would also have probably been at this point that the Guardians recovered a curious object associated with the Nine, a copper box with a red lid filled with dust, which was recovered from the Ishtar sink on Venus. Each tiny grain of dust is a perfect sphere and represents a planet. The complete nature of this box's mysteries aren't as unraveled as they could be, but it appears to relate to the Nine and the Ahamkara. It will later be investigated by Lavinia, the Cryptarchy rebel, though this would not be until more contemporary times in the last few years of Destiny's story that have followed since our own resurrection. As the Battle of the Twilight Gap took place, Mara Sov would engage the forces of the House of Wolves. She won the battle and would take Skolas prisoner. Varix would also find himself in the service of the Queen, having betrayed his former Kell to his new sovereign. Around the time of these so-called Reef Wars, Sieur Ido was also killed by the Nine. When Sieur Ido's body was discovered, a strange coin was also found on her person. From here, Mara Sov would send Orin to seek the ones who had killed the first Queen's Wrath, and to discover the truth behind whether or not it was deliberate. Orin would begin her search, the long search she conducted for the Nine at large. This would last up until the onset of the Red War. At a point in time near this moment, Orin's lover Namchi would be killed aboard the RSS Amestris by the Aphelion, and Orin would later learn of it on Bamberger. On this same station, she would start her brief relationship with Wu Ming, better known to us as the Drifter. She would also end this relationship after she learned of his lying nature. The Nine would continue to interact with Queen Mara Sov in an extended series of dealings over many years. The full extent of her bargaining with the Nine remains a mystery even to this day. All that is clear is that she has bargained with them many times. Eventually, our ghost would find us, and the contemporary events of Destiny would begin to unfold. Our resurrection was also a part of the Nine's plans. Amongst the early foes that we defeated was Crota, the son of Oryx. But after his death, the Wreath's Corsairs began to note changes within a station inside their territory, referred to sometimes as A113, or the Cocytus Apertures. The Nine had wrested control of the Apertures for themselves, which previously linked to Crota's throne world. After this point, the inner orbits of the Nine appeared to have started using the Cocytus Apertures to conduct alchemical experiments, sending particles, then molecules, and eventually failed forms of life through the gateways. These findings of the Awoken would be recorded, but the secrets would eventually be lifted from their archives by hidden agents in the time after the Red War. After Crota's defeat, some of the Reef's crows, autonomous intelligence and scouting drones, were noted to have entered the Cauldron of Rhea, presumably a location somewhere on Saturn's moon of Rhea. These crow drones are not to be confused with the crow himself, who at the time was still known as Prince Aldrin. Mara's Techians noted that the Nine would not approve of this action, and as a means of a peace offering and to commemorate some shared victory that they had together, Mara opted to send them Skolas the Rabbit as a gift. The Nine responded by releasing Skolas and gifting him with a catch. From here, Skolas was able to start the rebellion of the House of Wolves that set the Reef ablaze. Mara was forced to work more closely with the Guardians of the Lost City in order to combat Skolas. This probably played into the Nine's greater aims of ensuring that the city and the Reef were tied together in closer cooperation so that they might survive the eventual return of the Witness. Given how critical Mara Sov was to our survival, and how her link with Crow allowed us to even enter the Pale Heart, this was a wise move indeed. A few years later, After the defeat of Oryx and his Taken, and after we had settled the various threats rising from the Plague Lands, something new approached the system: the Red Legion. At this juncture, one of the 9 perceived the chance to separate Orin from her ghost Gol. They also doubtless saw the potential opportunity to learn how to take the light for themselves. This one member of the 9 used dark matter to destroy the last city's early warning satellites, and in doing so, assisted the Red Legion in successfully storming the last city and capturing the Traveler. When they did so, they cut off the light from the ghosts and the Guardians. Orin's ghost Gol was shut off from the light as well, leaving it vulnerable. Eventually, Gol was killed, leaving Orin lightless and alone. She was now much more vulnerable to the 9 and their whispers, and eventually would go out into the heliopause to seek them beyond the hissing silence. She ceased to be Orin and became the new emissary of the 9. Following the Red Legion's defeat, the 9 began to reach out to us through Orin and brought the trials of the 9 to the Guardians for a year, as they evaluated which of us might be best suited to become their fated weapon. Not long after this point in time, the Cryptarchy rebel Lavinia would begin to investigate the 9 for herself. This would lead her to various interactions with the Lost City, its Cryptarchy, its security services, and many facets of the Awoken of the Reef. It would also lead her to the Cocytus Apertures, and eventually, she would step through, immersing herself in the 9 realms and understanding their true nature. The Drifter would also have his fair share of interactions with the 9 at this point, as he would be gifted the Hall by the 9 after he showed his capacity to use darkness, another key skill that the 9 knew we would need for the battles ahead. They also instructed him to begin hosting the games of Gambit, which was one of our first avenues for using this power in some manner. In our first weeks exploring the Dreaming City, we would also step into the Queen's Court, and we would see Mara Sov negotiating with the 9 by means of a conversation with Orin, or the Emissary as she was better known. All we managed to hear of this conversation was that Mara was granting them permission to move an asset into position beyond the grave of the First Fleet, presumably a location near Saturn and the Dreadnought. To this day, we still do not know the consequences of this conversation. The 9 and the Drifter would continue to be involved in our story only a few short months later, as the 9 began to beckon us to the 9 realms and unknown space with their invitations. Through the Emissary and the 9, we would expand our perspective on many of those who the 9 had interacted with. It was also thanks to these invitations that we saw what the 9 had been warning the Drifter about: the imminent return of the Black Fleet and the Witness. With the arrival of those dark forces on our shores, the Drifter and Eris would seek out the 9 in order to obtain answers to an important question, namely, what is the nature of the darkness? The 9 were willing to oblige, and supplied an answer in the form of a prophecy revealed to us within the deeper reaches of the Hall. This prophecy would show us that darkness was not a purely evil force, and that it was actually a neutral and natural phenomena of the universe at large. It also showed us glimpses of the foe that awaited us on Europa. Some time would pass, but the 9 would continue to be a mystery, even more so when they began to invite us to take part in the strangest affair we've had with them to this date, the so-called Dares of Eternity, a mind-bending series of contests that saw us pulling strange trinkets and prizes from across unknown space, and potentially other realities. Xur noted that these were prizes from across the Paraverse, implying that these trinkets we collected were from other universes close enough to us to affect our own, something which we still do not understand fully to this day, and which has never been expanded upon since. In time, As the war against the Black Fleet reached a boiling point, the Witness found the Veil and used it to enter the Traveler. This would lead to our eventual discovery of the Veil for ourselves, as well as Chioma Essie's Veil containment logs, which documented what happened to both her and Maya Sundaresh. This would be one of the many stepping stones that helped to lead us to the eventual defeat of the Witness within the pale heart of the Traveler. This also led to the release of the Echoes, one of which was claimed by Maya Sundaresh on Nessus, deep within the Vex network. She would make use of this Echo and would transform, taking on the title of the Conductor. She would eventually be defeated by Ikora Rey and Saint 14 a few weeks later, but she would escape with her Echo into the Vex network and would continue her long-term plans of trying to bring back her wife, Chioma Essie. At least, a perfect version of Chioma, given that the many murdered versions of her that she tested in her Nessian laboratory were apparently not satisfactory. This is coincidentally and horrifyingly how the original Chioma Essie also met her end, degaussed in Maya's lab, like the many copies from the Ishtar Collective. After we destroyed another Echo, found in proximity to the Dreadnought and Saturn, we would receive yet more communications from the Nine in the form of strange chess pieces that manifested throughout the system. This was our first indication that we would be summoned to Kepler. Not long after these events, Orin discovered that her ghost Gol was killed by a member of the Nine, and prepared to leave their service as their emissary for good. She still held enough independence to make this choice, even though it would take her some time to break free. It was also around this time that she would comprehend the message from 3 that she had to deliver to us, which was to assemble the Guardian, Lodi, and Ikora to hear 3's dying words, and to get the Drifter to bring the Hall so that they could temporarily bring 3 back to life. Before Orin could leave the service of the Nine, they would preside over the right of the Nine, which saw Guardians once again proving their mettle against the toughest foes of the system. It would also be around this time that calamity truly struck. Maya Sundaresh, the Conductor, would find 3, and would demand that it trade the places of Earth from her past with the Earth of the present day. When 3 was unable to do so, given that the Nine can only pull objects forward in time and not back in time, it would be punished. Maya Sundaresh punished 3 by dragging it from the 4th dimension into the 3rd. This is the equivalent of one of us being squashed from 3 dimensions into 2, being rolled flat, like on the surface of a painting. And at this moment, 3 died. 3's death was heralded by the House of Exile's new Ascendant leader, a fallen known as Archon Lavask. He moved to try and feed the corpse of 3, which he named the Giver, to the singularity at the heart of Kepler. He did this at the behest of a voice he could hear, a voice that spoke of a grand design that would lead them to glorious ascension, as the singularity consumed all of Kepler, and eventually all of Sol, destroying the enemies of the House of Exile, and leading them to become the House Ascendant. Not long after this point, Lodi, who had been abducted from the 20th century, found himself stranded in our time on Kepler, far in the future. He would begin to try and make his way home, but would not get very far, only being able to make contact with the local Ionians. He also tried to make sense of everything that happened to him, to a great lack of success as well. After much struggle and frustration, Orin would finally break 3 of the 9 and would reclaim her old identity. She left their service for good and was likewise stranded on Kepler. Eventually, we would make our way to Kepler, meet Lodi and Orin, discover the presence of Maya's Choral Vex and Archon Lavask's strange House of Exile, and fight against those forces that stood in our way as we discovered more about the Nine. Together with Ikora, the Drifter, and the Ionians, we helped to put a stop to the Archon's plans. Orin and Lodi also saw the transfer of power between them, as one emissary left the position for good, and the other stepped into the breach. And from here, all the pieces were in place for us to receive Three's message. Thanks to Maya's actions, it was dead, and its death would start a chain reaction that would lead to our extinction. Our only course of action, should we wish to survive the oncoming catastrophe of unknown origins, would be to bind the Nine. The ramifications of Three's death, how we should bind the Nine, and what this means, are still unknown to us. As we stand here in the early makings of a new age, we are bound to see the universe around us go through wild changes. The only certainty is this: so long as there is the pull of gravity and the ever-presence of dark matter, the Nine will be at the heart of it all. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, go ahead and leave a like and leave your thoughts down below in the comments. This was another one of those videos that took Martin and I a while, and he put a lot of effort into this in particular, so a huge thank you goes out to him. If you did enjoy this, please let me know. My plan is to make a few more pieces of long-form content, but I also want to use this as a bit of a sounding board to discern whether we should be making more long-form like this generally. That being said, if you enjoyed the video, know that your viewership as always is quite enough for me. However, I also want to thank Geology this time for sponsoring the video. But my name is Bife. Porodacia ad Astra. I'll see you Starside.